77 years ago, Bob Marley and the Wailers took a massive artistic risk that changed the sound of world music, but also exponentially increased awareness of Black consciousness in the world. So by 1973, Bob Marley and the Wailers were already a huge Jamaican band, huge in Jamaica and the Caribbean communities across the world, right? But they signed a deal in 1972 with Chris Blackwell's Island Records with the promise of making them more than a band huge among certain communities, but a huge global brand. All they had to do was put out a commercial reggae album, sort of like the one that Desmond Dekker did in 1968, and similar to the album Jimmy Cliff did in the 1970s all the way to 1972. So all Bob Marley and the Wailers had to do was follow the template laid by Desmond Dekker and Jimmy Cliff. But they chose to do something else, take a risk. And they put out their first root reggae album, Catch a Fire, in 1973. And that changed everything. My name is Nenebi Tony. This is Juice and Nuts. This is a music review platform where I review African music and also use this platform as a way of raising consciousness of African culture. By African culture, I mean Black culture around the world. And this week, I'm reviewing Bob Marley's 1973 album, Catch a Fire. And I'm reviewing this album because May 18th, 2025 marked 15 years since Damian Marley and Nas put out their collaborative album, Distant Relatives. And if you ask any Ghanaian man over the age of 40, people like slightly older than me, even people my age, if you ask any Ghanaian man over the age of 30, they're gonna tell you that is the greatest album ever put out. And I was thinking, in order to talk about the lyricism of Nas and Damian Marley, I'll have to talk about Bob Marley. In order to talk about Bob Marley, I'll have to talk about Marcus Garvey. In order to talk about Marcus Garvey, I'll have to talk about His Highness, His Royal Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie. In order to talk about Haile Selassie, I'll have to talk about Queen Sheba and King Solomon in the Bible. In order to talk about King Solomon and Queen of Sheba, I'll have to talk about um, Moses, right, and the book of Exodus. And either to bring all this together, I'll have to talk about one album because this album, Catch a Fire by Bob Marley and the Wailers, is a perfect amalgamation of all these different themes. So I'm trying to create a narrative through the use of Bob Marley's music to talk about African in the diaspora. And I say African in the diaspora because Bob Marley is a Rastafarian. And one of the themes of Rastafarianism is the embrace of Pan-Africanism, the fact that um, all Black people from anywhere in the world have one root, and that is Africa, right? Peter Tosh has a song called African. You can listen to that song for an explanation of what that mentality is. But for today, we are going to focus on just one album, Bob Marley and the Wailers Catch a Fire. Let's get into it. So let's start by setting the scene. So in 1972, Jimmy Cliff put out a movie called The Harder They Come. The Harder They Come is credited as being the movie that created global awareness of Jamaican culture and took reggae music from just something within the Caribbean community to a more global audience, right? Because even though Desmond Dekker had a song called Israelite, which hit the chart in UK and the US, the success of Desmond Decker's Israelites was driven largely by the immigrant communities in these countries. But when Jimmy Cliff put out the movie The Harder They Come, is a movie. People love movies, people love visuals. It created a visual accompaniment for reggae music that was already bubbling in the US and in the UK, right? So even the soundtrack for the movie The Harder They Come, most of the songs, if you go on any streaming platform and hit play on the Harder They Come soundtrack, you are going to realize that you know almost all the songs. You know, you can get it if you really want, by the rivers of Babylon. I can't think of the other songs, but that movie was so hugely popular that it made record labels in the US and the UK started going to look for reggae artists to sign. And that is when Bob Marley and the Wailers came into the picture. But let me go back a little bit and take a little decoy. The movie The Harder They Come has official soundtrack that have the lyrics, The harder they come, the harder they fall. And in 2022, Jay-Z put out a movie, a black western for on Netflix called The Harder They Fall. And I submit to you that Jay-Z directly borrowed the title The Harder They Fall of his black western from the movie The Harder They Come. So because the movie The Harder They Come by Jimmy Cliff is a way of presenting Jamaican culture to the world, Jay-Z thought that the best way to present black western and black cowboy culture to the world was through the movie The Harder They Fall. So Jay-Z was playing on Jimmy Cliff's idea, right? And it is interesting. I've talked before about Jay-Z's love and inspiration from reggae music, so I'm not making this up. This is obvious, right? But there's something I want to say. Beyonce's country album, Cowboy Carter, is Beyonce's way of claiming black ownership of country music. Because the rise of country music in America is linked to Southern culture. And Southern culture isn't just white Southern culture, but black Southern culture is also part of Southern culture. But even the country music sound take its root specifically from the African instrument that the slaves and Southern people were using to make music. But not to go there. But I want to talk about the title of the album, Cowboy Carter. It is my opinion that the album title Cowboy Carter is a homage to Jay-Z's dad, who I think is nicknamed Cowboy Carter. Because Jay-Z has said in the past that he supports the Dallas Cowboys because his dad was a cowboy fan. But he wasn't just a Dallas Cowboy fan, he was also a real cowboy. Jay-Z talked about how his dad used to wear cowboy hats around New York. So if you are a black man walking around New York wearing a cowboy hat, it's obvious that people are going to start calling you cowboy. And his name was Carter. So obviously Cowboy Carter. That's what I think. So while Cowboy Carter is a big artistic statement by Beyonce, it's also personal to her being a person with cowboy roots from Texas, but also her husband Jay-Z's dad being a cowboy. That is my opinion. That's just a little decoy. Now, let's get into the album. And talking about claiming stuff, the first song on the Catch a Fire album is this song, Concrete Jungle. Bob Marley definitely popularized the phrase concrete jungle. Anytime you hear the expression concrete jungle, the first person you're going to think about is Bob Marley. And I believe when Tupac wrote that he's a road that roots from the concrete, he was referencing Bob Marley, right? However, the phrase concrete jungle was Bob Marley's way of claiming and owning something that had been associated with elitism and black and urban migration, dating all the way to 1925. So in 1925, the phrase concrete jungle began being popularized specifically in newspaper writings in big cities like San Francisco and New York, right? So journalists started complaining about how people from rural parts of America and other parts of the world were moving to their beloved big cities of San Francisco, Baltimore in Maryland, and New York City in New York, right? So I've gone back and read some of these articles that use the phrase concrete jungle, and I think that the people were using the phrase as a derogatory term of trying to say that the people from rural America were jungle people, aka bush people, aka not coof enough to live in, I don't know if coof is a word, but coof enough to live in their beloved big cities. And I went back and read one specific article from San Francisco written somewhere in 1935 where the journalist was complaining about the fact that there were too many houses being built in San Francisco. Who complains about houses being built? So it gives you the idea that he wasn't complaining about houses being built. He was complaining about how foreigners were coming into their cities to take over their city. And this is funny because 100 years down the line, people are still complaining about foreigners coming to take over their cities and countries. Interesting. So that was its first use in literature. And in 1945, there's this movie called The Lost Weekend by Billy Wilder. And it is the first known um, pop culture use of the phrase concrete jungle. And in the movie, the main character, was using the phrase concrete jungle to reference New York, where the springing up of towers and big buildings is making New York look like a jungle. So New York was looking like a jungle. The buildings in New York are making New York look like a jungle with, the way big trees look in jungles, right? So the skyscrapers in New York are making New York look like concrete jungle, like a bush place. So again, the use of the expression concrete jungle in the movie Lost Weekend is supposed to be an elitist critique of rural people moving to New York and taking over their city. Then in 1965, a British movie was released in the US with the title Concrete Jungle. So the movie was released in the UK under the title The Criminal. And in the movie, it portrayed a harsh reality of living in prison, of prison life. A majority of the prisoners portrayed in the movie were the Irish people. If you know the history of Irish people, you know that that movie was supposed to be a derogatory insult at Irish people. So the movie was banned in Ireland and it was released in the US under the title Concrete Jungle. So the prison walls are the concrete jungles, right? So when Bob Marley used the phrase concrete jungle, he was looking at all this history and using the phrase concrete jungle as a person who would be considered somebody who is living in a concrete jungle. So Bob Marley claimed that yes, I am living in a concrete jungle, but he rephrased it. This is how he rephrased it. So Bob Marley wrote this song living in the US. His mom was living in the US and he moved to the US to live with his mom. So he was referencing living in America as a concrete jungle. So the concrete jungle, according to Bob Marley's mentality, is not the rural people moving to the urban city, but the urban life itself is a concrete jungle. So in his Bob Marley's interpretation of concrete jungle, we are all caught up in the concrete jungle. And even though we don't have chains on our hands, we are still somehow in the concept of prison jungle. So he used the prison meaning of the concrete jungle and then the rural urban meaning of the concrete jungle to create this image of owning that yes, it's true that we are moving to these big cities, but we are not moving here because we want to. We are moving here because we have to. We have to survive, you know? That is what so the hustler's mentality was what Bob Marley was portraying in the song Concrete Jungle. But the intelligence of Bob Marley's writing is something that I was marveled by. The first three lines on the song are no sun will shine in my day, the high yellow moon won't come out to play, darkness has covered my light. That caught my attention for so many reasons, and I want to talk about just one of the reasons. Light pollution is this concept where artificial light, like street light, building light, and everything, creates a sort of health hazard on the human body and the ecosystem. But most importantly, it creates a distortion in the atmosphere so that it is impossible to see stars in the night, right? So if you live in any big city in the world, whether it is New York City, London, Lagos, Accra, Kingston, Jamaica, it is very hard for you to see the stars at night because the artificial light in your city makes it impossible for you to look up and see the light. So light pollution is something that is very much associated with urban places. So Bob Marley opening his album by complaining about lights being impossible to see is just a scientifically point understanding of the world and urban migration that I was like, wow. This Bob Marley was young when he wrote these things. Anyway, and so that takes me to another the next song on the album, which is Slave Driver. So I look at Concrete Jungle by Bob Marley as a song that spoke to the plight of poor and disenfranchised people worldwide, no matter their race. Wherever in the world you are from, whether it was London, because Bob Marley lived in London before, the US, because Bob Marley lived in the US before, or Jamaica, you are caught up in this concrete jungle of trying to make something of yourself, but you can't. But the second song on the album was Slave Driver, where Bob Marley took the conversation from everybody to focus on the black race. And this is important because around this time, Jamaica had independence in 1972, and then the Jamaican Labour Party came to power. But from 1962, when Jamaica had independence, to date, Jamaica is still under the Commonwealth of Nations. So the official head of state of Jamaica is the British monarch. So King Charles III is still the head of state of Jamaica. So when Bob Marley was talking about slave driver, he was referring to the ruling party in Jamaica. So the ruling party in Jamaica was supposed to be the party that liberated Jamaica from colonialism. But when Jamaica became independent, the ruling party was still holding alliance or allegiance to the Western power structure, to the British and to the Americans, right? So the expression slave driver is used in the past to reference black people who watch over other slaves for the white slave master. So white people who were in charge of monitoring slaves for the white slave owners were called overseers. So overseers were the white people, but slave drivers were black people who themselves were slaves who were holding uh, authority over um, other slaves for the slave owners. So basically, they were slaves who were driving other slaves for the slave owners. So, slave driver is a specific reference to the political power structure that existed in Jamaica at the time. And if you're a black person who live anywhere in the world that is a black country, is a critique of the political power structure that exists in any black country in the world. Ghanaian leaders to hold allegiance to Western powers, Nigerian leaders to hold allegiance to Western powers. I don't know if we can ever break free of that. I don't know. But that was what was the name Bob Marley was talking about. But the interesting thing about this is Bob Marley was hopeful for a time where the slave drivers will catch a fire. Catch a fire is a Jamaican phrase that means burn in hell. So Bob Marley was hopeful for the time when the enslaved will rise above the slave drivers. So I'm saying this because Bob Marley's lyrics, even though they used a lot of historical imagery, he wasn't talking about history when he was speaking. He was talking about what was happening in his world at the time he was speaking, right? So the slave driver was not the Asian slave drivers from when slavery was legal, but the people who were having political power in his day, who were ruling over the people and holding the people captive for the power structure. So Slave Driver is one of those songs where Bob Marley painted a picture of hope for the black race. And that is a powerful song. You should listen to it. 400 Years was written by one of the members of Bob Marley and the Wailers group, your man Peter Tosh. Peter Tosh is one of my favorite writers in the world, period. I look at Peter Tosh and Bob Marley like Beyoncé and Kanye West, where Bob Marley is Beyoncé, polished, know how to present his message in a powerful but still palatable way, and Kanye West is just raw. But I love Peter Tosh more because I love raw. So Peter Tosh wrote 400 Years, and I think probably majority of this video, the idea around doing this review for this album was to talk about the lyrics of 400 Years. I want to start with one of the first lines that got my attention in the song 400 Years. On the song Bob 400 Years, actually, there are two versions of 400 Years available on streaming right now. There is a Peter Tosh version and then the Bob Marley version. Both are the same lyrics, and both lyrics were written by Peter Tosh. So, on the first lines that Bob Marley sang were, how do they fight against the poor? Why do they fight against the poor youth? Why do they fight against the poor youth? Why do they fight against the poor youth? In order to explain what he was driving at, let's talk about World War II. If you study history, you will be taught that World War II started in 1939 when Nazi Germany attacked Poland. That is a wrong Eurocentric reading of history. And I think that exists because acknowledging when World War II really started would have to force Europeans and Western powers to acknowledge the fact that they played themselves when they refused to listen to the powerful speech that His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie delivered at the League of Nations. So, World War II actually started in 1935 when unprovoked Mussolini attacked Ethiopia. Boom. So, colonialism and the scramble for Africa caused a lot of Europeans to start colonizing a lot of African countries. So, A lot of time people read Mussolini's attacks of Ethiopia as an attempt at colonialism. But no, that is not what Mussolini thought he was doing. Mussolini believed that what he was doing by attacking Ethiopia was rebuilding the Roman Empire. You know, has-beens, people who used to be powerful, have this way of believing that they can reclaim their power by acting in the way that they did when they had power. But bro, you don't have power anymore for a reason. So Mussolini attacked Ethiopia in 1935 and captured Addis Ababa. And he said his goal was to bring Western civilization to Ethiopia, who asked him, and also re claim the power of the Roman Empire in Africa, bro. Roman Empire was big across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Why did you start in Africa? That's what Bob Marley was asking when they say, why do they fight against the poor youth? That's because Mussolini knew that nobody else in the world were going to join Ethiopia to fight against him. Because he had all the bombs, all the guns, all the ammunition. So he descended on Ethiopia, and Ethiopia rose and fought against them, but they had guns. The man with the gun rules at the end of the day. So they captured Addis Ababa, but Haile Selassie didn't go away quietly. He went to the League of Nations and delivered a powerful speech that had the word, "It is us today, is going to be you tomorrow." And he was ignored. And 4 years later, Hitler noticed the quiet or the inaction of the Western powers or the global powers when Mussolini attacked Ethiopia, and that energized him to attack Poland. It is important to notice that Ethiopian Ethiopians have a direct blood lineage to the Israelites in the Bible or the Jewish people. So Hitler's crusade against Jewish people was pre-existed by Mussolini's crusade against Jewish people, black Jewish people, and nobody cares about black Jewish people. So, it is what it is. And so when Haile Selassie stood up against um, Mussolini and lost, but he didn't go away, went and kept fighting till he came back to power. Black people in Jamaica noticed that, and they saw Haile Selassie as a fulfillment of a prophecy by Marcus Garvey, who said, "Look to Africa for a king." So Haile Selassie's effort to reclaim power energized and became the birth of the Rastafarian movement, right? So that was what Bob Marley was referencing when he says, "Why do they fight against the poor youth?" You know? So it's 400 years, the same philosophy as Bob Marley said. The same philosophy has always been global domination. That's what has always been the European mindset, to dominate the world. I don't think Africans ever had this notion of global domination. We just wanted to be peaceful and have fun. And people always will bring up the likes of Mansa Musa and the rest to try to justify that Africans also were trying to go for global domination. No, actually. African leaders, even African emperors in the past, always had one vision: to trade. Trade was always something that Africans love to do, right? Trade and build communities. Trade and build communities, right? So this idea of global domination or world domination is a very European way of thinking. But let's keep going. So when Haile Selassie was able to recapture power, it led to the creation of the Rastafarianism and the faith around Rastafarianism. But it also led to what Bob Marley referred on the 400 songs as "Let's Make a Move." Now, fun fact: The black stars in the Ghana flag is directly related to the Titanic ship that sank. I phrase it like that because it makes it easier to draw the connection. So let's start from the black stars in Ghana. When Ghana became independent in 1957, the government put out a call for people to design a flag for the country. And a young schoolgirl called Theodosia Oko, I think Theodosia Oko was alive till like maybe 10 years ago. She was a young schoolgirl, maybe at the age of 13 or younger, maybe 9 or 13, one of those. She was, I believe, younger than 15 years old when she designed the Ghana flag. So the four colors of the Ghana flag are red, gold. Even though it looks like yellow, it's called gold, green, and the black star. The red is a reference to our ancestors who laid their life for us. We'll get into that later. The yellow is the richness of our natural resources, the gold, the diamond, and the rest. And the green is our land or our greenage. So at the time Ghana was independent, about 60% of the country of Ghana was covered by forest. So the country was mostly green. That is why we have green in our flag. These days, the country is about 40% of. Actually, wrote an academic paper on it. I just don't remember the number, but yeah. So the green is a reference to the landscape, and so the black stars in the flag. If you are in school in Ghana, you are taught that it means the hope of Africa. What does the hope of Africa mean? You are also taught that Ghana is the gateway to Africa. What does the gateway to Africa mean? Boom. So, I don't. In the 19th century, there was this shipping company called White Star, and White Star built the biggest ship called Titanic, and the goal of the Titanic was to ship people from Europe to the newfound world, America, right? So it was the biggest ship built, and we all know the story of Titanic. It never got to America. It broke down, right? But the story of White Star and the Titanic inspired Marcus Garvey to create his shipping line called Black Star Line. And the goal of Marcus Garvey was to connect Black people in the newfound world, that is in the Caribbean and America, to Black people in Africa, to take them back home to Africa. That was the idea behind Marcus Garvey's Black Star Line. So when Ghana became independent, one of the big goals of our first president, Kwame Nkrumah, was to make Ghana the home for all Black people in the world to come to. So that is the meaning of gateway to Africa. So all Black people around the world who wants to come to Africa, Ghana is where you have to come through. And so the black star is a representation of the fact that whenever you see the black star in our flag and you're a Black person anywhere in the world, Ghana is your home. And that has been government policy even till date. If you're a Black person anywhere in the world and you go to Ghana today, it's easy to become a citizen of Ghana. Dr. Uma Johnson just became a citizen of Ghana, because of that. So that was the idea behind the black star in the flag. Boom. But it is linked to this thing called repatriation. So repatriation is Marcus Garvey's idea, which became linked to Rastafarianism. And personally, I group repatriation into three different things, right? I believe there is physical repatriation, where Black people from anywhere in the world can physically move and live back in the continent of Africa. Rita Marley moved from Jamaica and started living in Ghana from the 90s. As we speak today, Rita Marley lives in Ghana. right? So Rita Marley is an example of physical repatriation because she is a true believer of the Rastafarian faith of, going back home. And there's another form of repatriation I like to call pilgrimage repatriation. Pilgrimage is, you know, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, one of the very few public appearances or being seen together publicly was their time in Ghana. So Malcolm X went on a pilgrimage to Mecca because he's a Muslim, and then he went on a pilgrimage to Ghana because he's a black person. And Martin Luther King also went on a pilgrimage to Ghana, and Maya Angelou also went on a pilgrimage to Ghana, and so Maya Angelou is credited for mentioning Ghana when she wrote her poem at Michael Jackson's funeral. He mentioned Michael Jackson's Ghana at Michael Jackson's funeral because she used to live in Ghana. And so there were black people, especially in the 1960s to the 1970s, who made pilgrimage to what was the name, to Ghana. I'm actually writing a book on pilgrimage to Africa today, but that probably will take a year or two before it comes out. And the third form of repatriation is mental repatriation, where you are conscious that if you're a black person, you have a home and a root back in Africa, right? So this idea of wherever you are, if you're a black person, you are an African, is something that was pervasive in the music of people like Peter Tosh. Peter Tosh have a song called African. Joseph Hill, aka Culture, has a song called um, Humble African, right? So repatriation is also a mental thing. You don't necessarily have to move physically to live in Africa. You just have to be conscious that you have a home. That is about it. So that is the idea behind the song. Some of the ideas being expressed in the song 400 years. So the song 400 years is about the fact that in the Bible, God told Abraham that his children were going to be slaves in Egypt for 400 years. And after 400 years, he'll take them to the promised land. And Africa is our promised land. So that's it. And that brings me to the next song. Now let's move from the heavy theme of repatriation and talk about something more fun by talking about the song Stop the Train. The song Stop the Train gives us a very interesting insight into Jamaican music culture and the idea of community in Jamaican and pretty much all African culture, right? So, the song Stop the Train is was written by Peter Tosh and is written as a root reggae version of another song by Kid and Tex called Stop That Train. So, um, in Jamaican music, there's this thing called rhythm. Rhythm is mostly associated with dancehall these days, where when artists put out a song, they'll also put the beat for the song on the album. So when when DJs are playing the song, they play the song, but sometimes DJs just play the rhythm for the song and do their freestyle thing over it, right? And rhythm has grown and is a big part of the entire Jamaican music culture. And in the time of Bob Marley, rhythm still existed. So the song Stop the Train was, Peter Tosh building on the rhythm of Kid and Tex. But even in the movie that I mentioned earlier, in the movie The Harder They Come, the first scene of the movie has a song called Draw Your Brakes by Scotty. And Draw Your Brakes is also a rhythm. So the original Stop That Train by Kate and Tex is about heartbreak. Peter Tosh version is about living a bad situation. And Scotty's version is also about living something else, right? So three different concepts, the same theme, right? So I love the idea that you can get an insight into the world that these artists were creating in just by drawing their line from what they created and compare it to other artists in their world, right? So I have this theory that the Jamaican concept of rhythm is the root that birthed the American globally recognized music genre of hip hop. So rap music, in my opinion, was birthed out of rhythm. Let me explain. DJ Kool Herc, who is credited as the person who created rap music, is a Jamaican American. And he came to America as a Jamaican immigrant. So he was a DJ in Jamaica, so knew about the concept of rhythm in Jamaica. But in America, artists did not put the what's the name? The beat for the song they were putting out on the album. So DJ Kool Herc did something. He would cut out the part of the beat that have no lyrics and loop it. So he created his own rhythm from the American funk songs that were big back in the day, and would do his toasting over it. That's what they used to call it in Jamaica. He was toasting. So he would do his toasting over the American funk rhythm that he broke. He was and that created what we now know as hip hop. So I believe that Kool Herc was an innovative person who wanted to bring the Jamaican concept of rhythm to America, but he had a challenge of American record labels not being as communal as Jamaican record labels. So he had to make a way, and then he created the beat breaking that led to the creation of the sound of hip hop. So, like I said, reggae music is the father of all form of black music today, or all form of pop music today, if you ask me. That's my opinion. And which brings me to, I think I'll end it here. I've been going for a while because I want to talk about another rhythm. So on the album, let me end with this. One of the biggest songs from um, Catch a Fire album is the song Stir It Up. So on the cassette, back in the day, they used to release cassette. The last song on the side A of the cassette was this song called, I think, Let's Go on a Date, something about dates. Take Me on a Date, something like that. And the beat or the rhythm for the date song, you know what? Let me do this. My TV is right here. I can just find what the title of the song is. Yeah. So on the cassette version of the song, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Give me a second. I won't cut this part out, but let me build this up. On the cassette version of the album Catch a Fire by Bob Marley that came out in 1973, the last song on the side A is this song called Baby We've Got a Date, aka Rocket Baby. It's a very playful, fun song. And the first song on side B is one of Bob Marley's biggest song, Stir It Up. So both Baby We've Got a Date and Stir It Up were built on the same rhythm. So it was the same production for both songs. And they put both songs on the album. And Stir It Up ended up becoming the big song on the album. But here's the fun fact about Stir It Up. Bob Marley wrote Stir It Up like 5 years before he put it on his album. He wrote it for an American artist called Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash had gone to Jamaica and fell in love with reggae music and wanted to bring reggae music to a global audience. He actually took Bob Marley and the Wailers on tour with him to Europe and all that. And Johnny Nash, Bob Marley wrote a few songs for Johnny Nash, one of which was Stir It Up. So when Bob Marley was making his own album, he put his version of Stir It Up on the album. And the Bob Marley version of Stir It Up is the big one till date because because he owned the song, he performed it better. So Bob Marley is credited for writing for a whole hall of different artists, not just reggae artists. He wrote for pop artists. He wrote for artists from different countries too. You know, he's a very prolific writer, and I'm grateful I got to review this album and covered a few of the themes on this album. I know as time goes on, I'll be reviewing more and more albums from reggae, which will give me the chance to talk about more and more of these themes, you know, because these are heavy themes. These are not things that you can cover in short videos. These are things that you need time to talk about, you know? Thank you for listening. My name is Nenebi Tony, and my conclusion of this album is Catch a Fire by Bob Marley and the Wailers, aged like palm wine. Strong.